As communities across the United States began debating whether or not to add fluoride to their water supply in the 1950s and 60s, fluoride proponents claimed that there was no legitimate scientific opposition to fluoride. But in fact, in the late 1940s and the early 50s, there was a significant debate over the merits of fluoridation within the scientific, medical, and dental communities. Fluoride proponents dismissed any opposition to water fluoridation as cranks and quacks, although their legitimate concerns had a significant impact on anti-fluoridation referendums in communities across the United States. Opposition to water fluoridation was quickly relegated to the fringes within the scientific, medical, and dental communities, and by the early 1950s, long before the early trials had been completed, most dentists, doctors, and biochemists agreed that water fluoridation could help prevent tooth decay without harming anyone. We now know this to be completely untrue. However, what makes this story so interesting is that the benefits of fluoridation do not seem to be as great as was initially touted by proponents. Today, controlled studies show that fluoridation reduces cavities by approximately 15 to 35%, far less than the 66% reduction initially claimed by researchers and public health officials. Cavity rates have plummeted in both fluoridated and unfluoridated communities, and it's unclear exactly why children get fewer cavities than they did 60 years ago. However, fluoridated toothpastes and better dental care undoubtedly play a significant role. Today, most researchers believe that the effects of fluoride are predominantly topical, making fluoridated toothpaste a much more effective intervention than researchers thought it would be in the 1950s and 60s. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Zach and welcome to Nutrition Library, where we take an evidence-based approach to nutrition and supplementation. If you're new to the channel, do me a huge favor and hit the red subscribe button that's below this video so you can stay up to date with all of our future content. Thank you so much. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about what I believe to be one of the biggest public health blunders of the last century, the fluoridation of the public water system. And so what I hope to do in this video today is to present enough data to convince you of one primary thing. Fluoride is extremely toxic to human health and in particular men's health. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, fluoride was somewhat accidentally discovered in the early 1930s when it was discovered to cause unsightly tooth deformities in those that consumed it in high amounts. However, during the early stages of research, it was discovered that low doses of fluoride actually seemed to be somewhat protective against tooth decay, and by 1942, the U.S. Public Health Service was considering a study that would artificially add fluoride to city water supplies in order to assess its effects on tooth decay. However, they first needed to assess whether fluoride would cause any harm, and there were several important concerns here, mainly that fluoride would have a negative systemic impact on the body. Everyone recognized that high fluoride intake led to tooth deformity, but was there any possibility that fluoride would affect the body in other ways? Well, two articles published in 1937 that revealed cases of crippling fluoride toxicity seemed to indicate that it would. However, this research was often overlooked. Frank McClure, the U.S. chief of the Laboratory of Biochemistry, admitted at the time that, quote, epidemiological studies of the non-dental effects of fluoride are extremely few in number and very limited in scope. And McClure wasn't the only detracting voice at the time. Public health researchers Margaret and H.V. Smith warned in 1942 that, quote, the range between toxic and non-toxic levels of fluoride ingestion is very small. Any procedure for increasing fluoride consumption to the so-called upper limit of non-toxicity would be hazardous. And as the fluoridation debate continued into the 1950s, an MIT nutrition researcher named Robert S. Harris, concerned with the long-term effects of fluoride consumption, testified before Congress as follows. The literature indicates that fluoride at 1 part per million in water supplies can effectively reduce the incidence of caries in children in certain areas. The literature does not indicate, however, that the continued ingestion of fluoride at this level is harmless. In 1952, there were still highly respected scientists expressing concerns about fluoridation, and as communities across the United States debated the possibility of adding fluoride to the water supply in the 1950s and 60s, proponents regularly stated that dentists, doctors, and scientists were unanimous in their approval. However, this is simply not factual. Now, a lot of you guys at this point are probably asking yourself the question, Zach, what does this have to do with me? Well, in short, after 70 years of intense debate and intense research, I think that there are two primary things that have become extremely abundantly clear. One is that fluoride is an extremely potent endocrine disruptor and is especially destructive to the male endocrine system. And two is that fluoride is an extremely potent neurotoxic chemical, which clearly inhibits neurological development. And what I essentially want to do throughout the rest of this video is present to you guys the clinical data to essentially prove these two statements, starting with fluoride's effects on the endocrine system. Now, in 1994, a massive U.S. population-wide meta-analysis was performed to determine the effects of normal fluoride intake on reproductive capacity, and the results were extremely alarming. The researcher of this study eventually concluded that, and I quote, "For each region separately, the annual total fertility rate was regressed on the fluoride measure and socio-demographic covariables. Most regions showed an association of decreasing total fertility rate with increasing fluoride levels. Meta-analysis of the region-specific results confirmed that the combined result was a negative TFR to fluoride association. There is no evidence that this outcome resulted from selection bias, inaccurate data, or improper analytical methods." And after decades of research that suggested that fluoride had a negative impact on the endocrine system, this becomes the first clinical observational trial to demonstrate that fluoride does indeed have negative effects on the human endocrine system. Now, in this study that was published just 2 years later, took a more targeted approach to assess the specific effects of fluoride on testosterone levels. And the researchers here concluded that, and I quote, "Circulating serum testosterone in skeletal fluorosis patients were significantly lower than those of the control. Decreased testosterone concentrations in skeletal fluorosis patients and in males drinking the same water as the patients, but with no clinical manifestation of the disease compared with those of normal, healthy males living in areas non-endemic for fluorosis, suggest that fluoride toxicity may cause adverse effects on the reproductive system of males living in fluorosis endemic areas." Now, my immediate reaction after reading these two abstracts of these two clinical trials was to ask the simple question of like, well, what's the magnitude of effect here? How big of an effect is fluoride having on testosterone levels? And this is where it gets a little bit weird. The full text of these abstracts is not linked anywhere, and I mean anywhere on the internet whatsoever. And this is literally the first time after years of research that I've ever seen something like this. And so it's literally impossible to assess the magnitude of effect that fluoride is having on testosterone levels, except to take the researcher's word that it, quote, significantly lowered testosterone levels. However, lucky for us, we do have some research out of China that gives us a much clearer picture of the negative impact of fluoride on testosterone levels. The researchers in this study found that fluoride levels at merely 3 milligrams per liter was associated with a 40% reduction in testosterone levels. Fluoride was actually so potent at reducing testosterone levels in young men that their levels were comparable to the oldest tested demographic. Youth with high fluoride intake were associated with the testosterone levels of a 55-year-old. Now, to further my point here, let's go to this study that was published just 2 years ago that comes out of Mexico City that set out to assess the effects of fluoride on the onset of puberty in boys. And the researchers here concluded that, quote, "Childhood fluoride exposure at the levels observed in our study, which was fluoride exposure from municipal water sources, was associated with later pubertal development among Mexican boys at age 10 to 17. And so not only does it appear that fluoride intake is destructive to fertility, destructive to testosterone levels, but it also appears that when consumed earlier in life, it actually delays the onset of puberty. Now, at this point in our conversation, I do think it's worth noting that there is literally not a single study that detracts from this research. Every single study that has ever been performed on the relationship of fluoride to male testicular function has shown a negative impact. Every single one. However, the effects of fluoride actually go far beyond the male endocrine system, and fluoride is actually probably more well established as a neurotoxin than it is a endocrine disruptor. And because of the research presented thus far, as well as countless other studies that have been performed in animal trials, in 2006, the National Research Council was requested to perform the largest meta-analysis up until that point. And the conclusion of the NRC was as follows. Fluoride has the ability to interfere with the function of the brain. Studies of populations exposed to different concentrations of fluoride should be undertaken to evaluate neurochemical changes that may be associated with dementia. Consideration should be given to assessing the effects of chronic exposure, effects that might be delayed or occur late in life. And the review of the literature actually led the NRC to eventually recommend that the EPA lower the maximum contaminant level of fluoride in the water system, and eventually led the EPA to admit that there is, quote, substantial evidence of developmental neurotoxicity. Now, when it comes to the actual clinical research on the neurotoxic effects of fluoride, it's actually really difficult to choose from because of just how much damning research there is. However, there are a couple of recently published meta-analyses that are especially damning that I want to jump into real quick. The first one being this meta-analysis that was published in 2019, where the researchers concluded that, and I quote, "The recent epidemiological results support the notion that elevated fluoride intake during early development can result in IQ deficits that may be considerable. Recognition of neurotoxic risk is necessary when determining the safety of fluoride-contaminated drinking water and fluoride use for preventative dentistry. The notion that fluoride is primarily a developmental neurotoxicant means that fluoride, an element like lead, mercury, and arsenic, can adversely affect brain development at exposures much below those that cause toxicity in adults." And in this meta-analysis that was published in the same year, the researchers concluded that, and I quote, "Fluoride as a neurotoxin has been proven in several animal studies. A 2006 National Review Council report stated that it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the function of the brain and the body by direct and indirect means. Some individuals appear to be highly sensitive to fluoride, as shown by case studies and double-blind studies. In one study, which lasted 13 years, the results showed that about 1% of patients given only 1 milligram of fluoride each day developed negative reactions. Fluoridation of community drinking water is considered unethical because individuals are not being asked for their informed consent prior to medication. It is standard practice to obtain consent for all medication, and this is one of the key reasons why most of Western Europe has ruled against fluoridation. It is a violation of human rights, a direct violation of the Nuremberg Code that states that research or even routine medical procedures must be done with the voluntary cooperation of the subject, who must be fully informed of the risks or benefits of the procedure in which they are involved. Now, this is all absurdly alarming. However, I do want to leave you guys with a few practicals of what do we actually do with this research. And the first one is just obviously stop drinking tap water, and literally any water that doesn't explicitly state that it's fluoride free. My family and I, in light of the research that I did for this video, have exclusively switched over to reverse osmosis water, which is one of the only processes that is known to completely eliminate contaminants from water, along with things like vapor distillation. Now, unfortunately, it's also worth noting here that your run-of-the-mill water filters at home, like your Brita filter or the filter that's in your refrigerator, do not filter out fluorides, unfortunately. And so again, your best bet is to either stick with one exclusively reverse osmosis water or two vapor distilled water. Now, my family and I personally buy several gallons of reverse osmosis water every week and then remineralize it at our home. However, there are some reverse osmosis systems that you can purchase on the internet that you can hook up to your water system at home that also do the same job. Now, another practical thing that you can do is just simply share this video. And this is literally the first time that I've ever asked you guys to do that, but that's just because how strongly I feel about this subject. If we can't rely on our regulatory bodies to protect us, we have to take on the responsibility ourselves to protect ourselves. And one of the simple ways that you can do this is just by simply staying informed and helping those that you love stay informed. Now, if you guys are new to this conversation on natural hormone optimization, I would highly recommend go ahead and getting a at-home blood test to test your personal hormone profile. Everyone is at a completely different place when it comes to their hormone profile, and so being able to implement a strategy that is geared towards your personal profile is extremely important. So if you guys are interested in this, there is a link in the description where you guys can find the absolute best hormone test on the market. But other than that, guys, if y'all haven't downloaded any of the supplements supplement guides that I've got on my website. There's also going to be a link in the description to that. But other than that, guys, I think that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.